Alcohol has a peculiar way of stripping away the layers we carefully build around ourselves. In our sober state, most of us are engaged in a constant act of impression management, an ongoing performance where we monitor our words, filter our emotions, and tailor our behavior to fit the image we want others to see. This isn't inherently bad. In fact, it's necessary for society to function. We can't walk around revealing every raw thought or vulnerable truth to everyone we meet. It would make the world unbearably chaotic. But here's the thing, the same filters that keep social life orderly also make it incredibly difficult to access what's really going on beneath the surface of someone's mind. The person you're talking to isn't just telling you what they think, they're telling you what they think you want to hear, or what they feel is safe to say. Alcohol, for better or worse, often disrupts that process. When someone is drunk, the frontal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for self-control, planning, and social inhibition, becomes less active. This means the thoughts and feelings that would normally be screened out are now more likely to come spilling forward. The polite, "I'm fine," might be replaced by, "Actually, I'm miserable." The rehearsed, "I've moved on," might turn into, "I think about them every night." And suddenly, you're in the presence of something real. That's the key here, reality. Not the performance, not the carefully edited highlight reel, but the unpolished truth that lives in the shadows when the spotlight of self-consciousness is dimmed. Now, it's important to understand that this isn't a magic truth serum. Alcohol doesn't just make people honest, it makes them uninhibited. And those aren't exactly the same thing. Sometimes people will exaggerate when they're drunk or say things they don't fully mean because their emotional regulation is impaired. But often, the feelings that emerge are feelings that already existed. They were simply locked away behind layers of caution, fear, or shame. In this state, when you ask the right kind of question, you can bypass the outer defenses and connect directly with the undercurrent of who someone really is. That's why if you approach this with the right intent, not as a manipulator digging for dirt, but as someone seeking genuine understanding, you can uncover truths that might otherwise take years to reveal. You begin to see the fragile, unfiltered human being behind the persona. You might hear about the fears that keep them awake at night, the unspoken disappointments they've carried for years, the dreams they've been too embarrassed to voice aloud. And when they share these things, even in a drunken haze, it creates a rare and profound moment of connection. Philosophically, you could say that alcohol temporarily dismantles the false self, the social mask built to protect us from judgment, and exposes the true self with all its contradictions, longings, and vulnerabilities. In everyday life, that mask is firmly in place because we're constantly negotiating our place in the hierarchy of relationships in society. To remove it even slightly requires either deep trust or altered consciousness. When trust isn't yet established, altered consciousness often becomes the shortcut. But there's a responsibility here. You can't treat this as a one-sided opportunity to extract truth for your own advantage. The human soul, when laid bare, is not something to be exploited. It's something to be honored. If someone in their uninhibited state gives you a piece of their hidden reality, you're holding something sacred. How you respond in that moment will determine whether they feel betrayed or deeply understood when the night is over and the haze clears. And so, when alcohol lowers the guard, what you do next becomes a moral question. Will you use this moment to connect, to empathize, and to see more clearly? Or will you treat it as mere entertainment? Because here's the truth. What you choose in that moment doesn't just reveal who they are. It reveals who you are. There's a reason the question, "What do you really think of me?" has the potential to cut straight to the heart of human connection. On the surface, it's simple, just a request for feedback. But beneath it, it's a direct challenge to the layers of social diplomacy that govern most of our conversations. When you ask this, you're essentially saying, put aside the polite performance, the expected niceties, and the strategic omissions. Tell me the truth as you see it. That's a bold invitation, and most people won't take it unless the circumstances lower the risk of doing so. Alcohol often creates that environment. With the usual inhibitions dulled, people feel less threatened by the potential fallout of honesty. They're more willing to risk the awkwardness, the vulnerability, and even the potential conflict that truth can bring. It's important to understand why this particular question is so powerful. Human relationships are built on layers of perception. You have an idea of who you are. They have an idea of who you are. And then there's the reality, which may be something entirely different. In our daily interactions, we rarely get to see how those three versions line up. People will often soften their criticisms, exaggerate their praise, or simply avoid topics that could be uncomfortable. But when someone's guard is down, their perception of you can come out in a way that's startlingly direct. It might be affirming. It might be painful. But it will almost always be illuminating. When someone tells you in that unfiltered moment I think you're stronger than you realize, or I think you're selfish sometimes. They are handing you a mirror that reflects a version of yourself you might not be used to seeing. And that can be transformative because the way others perceive you shapes the way you move through the world, whether you realize it or not. If you've ever noticed how a single comment from someone you respect can change your confidence, your posture, or your decisions for weeks afterward, you understand the weight that external perception carries. Of course, not everything revealed in that moment will be the objective truth. People see you through the lens of their own experiences, biases, and emotional states. A drunk confession might be tinged with exaggeration or misinterpretation. But here's the key: even if it's not the objective truth, it's still the truth of how they see you. And that matters because relationships aren't built on objective reality. They're built on perceived reality. How someone thinks about you determines how they treat you, how much they trust you, and whether they let you close. From a psychological standpoint, this question also tests the depth of the relationship. When someone is sober, they might hesitate to answer honestly because they're weighing the consequences. Will this hurt you? Will it make you angry? Will it change how you see them? When they're drunk, those calculations fade. What's left is often the raw sentiment they've been carrying all along, perhaps waiting for the right moment to express. In that way, asking, "What do you really think of me?" in such a moment can accelerate understanding in a relationship far faster than months of polite conversation. But there's a caution here. You have to be prepared for an answer you don't want to hear. The human ego is fragile, and when we seek truth, we often secretly hope that truth will be flattering. Yet genuine growth comes from confronting the full spectrum of what others perceive, both the light and the shadow. If you can receive that feedback without defensiveness, you gain an incredible advantage: the ability to see yourself from another vantage point and adjust accordingly. And maybe that's the deeper point. The courage to ask this question isn't really about getting validation. It's about being willing to discover how the world experiences you, even if that knowledge stings. Because the truth about you exists in the space between your self-image and their perception, and only when you bridge that gap can you truly understand who you are becoming. Asking someone about their biggest regret is not just an inquiry into their past, it's an invitation into the architecture of their soul. Regret is one of the most revealing emotions we have because it is anchored in a deep understanding of what matters to us. You don't regret things that have no value to you. You regret the things that conflict with your sense of identity, your moral code, or your vision for the life you wish you had lived. When someone is sober, they often keep those regrets tightly sealed. They might package them neatly into socially acceptable stories. "I wish I'd traveled more," or "I should have taken that job." Safe, surface-level admissions that cost nothing to share. But when inhibitions are lowered, when the guard is down, and the need for self-protection is muted, those polite narratives can give way to truths that run much deeper, the kind that reveal the fault lines in a person's inner world. In that moment, a regret might come out that isn't just about missed opportunities, but about betrayal, cowardice, or love lost. It could be the friend they abandoned when things got hard, the relationship they sabotaged out of fear, the dream they buried because someone told them it wasn't realistic. And here's the thing: those regrets don't just live in the past. They actively shape the present. A person who regrets never speaking up in defense of themselves might still shrink in the face of conflict. Someone who regrets leaving a good partner might cling too tightly in their current relationships. Regret is like an invisible hand on the shoulder, constantly steering choices, often without conscious awareness. When you hear someone's biggest regret in a moment of unfiltered honesty, you're not just learning about what happened years ago, you're learning about the forces that are still shaping their behavior today. This is why the question is so powerful. It connects the dots between a person's history and their current reality. And if you listen carefully, you might even see how those regrets are driving their future without them realizing it. Psychologically, regret is tied to two key things: responsibility and loss. People don't regret things they had no control over. They regret the moments when they had agency but chose or failed to act in alignment with their values. This is what makes regret such a potent source of self-awareness. It's not just a record of past mistakes, it's a record of moments when their actions and their ideals collided. And when they share that with you, they are, in a way, exposing the blueprint of their moral compass. Of course, the question requires tact. It's not something to drop into casual conversation with the intention of provoking guilt. It should be asked with an undertone of curiosity and compassion, especially when the other person is in a state of lowered inhibition. Because while alcohol can unlock the door to honesty, it can also make people more emotionally fragile. If you create the sense that you're fishing for gossip or ammunition, you'll close that door immediately, even in their altered state. But if you approach it with genuine interest, if you give them the space to explore that regret without judgment, you might witness a moment of rare vulnerability, fear where they're speaking less to you and more to themselves, almost as if they're confessing to their own conscience. And this is the heart of it. Regret isn't just a window into the past, it's a compass pointing toward what matters most in the present. When someone lays that regret on the table, what they're really showing you is the gap between the life they have lived and the life they wish they had lived. And that is one of the most intimate truths you can ever be entrusted with. Asking someone, who do you miss most, is a deceptively simple question, but beneath it lies one of the deepest probes into the human heart. We often think of missing someone as a sentimental or romantic notion, but in reality, it is a compass pointing to the relationships that have defined us. When a person answers this question honestly, without the polite deflections and strategic omissions they use when sober, you gain insight into the bonds that still hold emotional gravity in their life. Even if those bonds have been severed by time, distance, or circumstance, alcohol, by lowering the defenses that normally keep those memories locked away, allows those truths to surface with a kind of raw immediacy. In that state, the names that escape their lips aren't calculated, they're instinctive. They don't think, what's the safest answer? They simply speak the name that sits closest to their heart. What's fascinating is that the person they miss most isn't always the one you'd expect. It might not be a current partner or even a former lover. Sometimes it's a childhood friend, a mentor, a sibling, or even someone who hurt them deeply but who still occupies an undeniable space in their emotional landscape. That's because missing someone isn't always about love in its purest form. Sometimes it's about unresolved attachment. The mind holds on to unfinished stories. We miss people not only because of the joy they brought us, but because of the questions they left unanswered, the wounds they never healed, or the part of ourselves we were when we were with them. From a psychological perspective, the act of missing someone is deeply tied to identity. When a person longs for another, they are often longing for a version of themselves that existed in that relationship. Think about it. If someone says they miss an old friend from their university years, they may actually be missing the freedom, the ambition, or the innocence they felt at that time. If they miss an ex-lover, they may be yearning for the passion, safety, or sense of belonging they experienced in that relationship. So when you ask, who do you miss most? And the truth comes out, you're not just learning about another person, you're learning about the version of themselves they feel most connected to or most distant from. This is why such a question can reveal vulnerabilities that might otherwise stay buried. People often pretend they've moved on, that the past is closed and forgotten. But missing someone is a reminder that emotional bonds don't dissolve on command. They linger, often in ways we can't logically explain. And when someone is intoxicated, they lose the careful discipline it takes to keep those memories in the background. Suddenly, the face of that person they've been trying to forget is right there again, and they speak it aloud without realizing they've just handed you a key to their inner world. However, there's also a moral weight to receiving that information. If someone reveals the person they miss most, especially in a moment of vulnerability, you're not just hearing a fact, you're hearing a confession. That name carries emotional history and possibly even pain. You can't treat it casually. That answer tells you where their loyalties, regrets, or longings still lie. It might also explain behaviors you've observed but couldn't understand, sudden mood changes, hesitations in commitment, or bursts of nostalgia. At its core, missing someone is an expression of unfulfilled connection. It's the echo of a bond that once mattered enough to shape them, and perhaps still does. When someone in their unguarded state tells you who they miss most, they're revealing the emotional thread that still pulls at them from the past. And in that moment, you're not just hearing about a person, you're hearing about the part of their soul that still hasn't let go. Asking someone, if you could start over, what would you do differently? Forces them to confront the tension between the life they have lived and the life they feel they should have lived. Most of us carry around a silent ledger, a mental record of choices made, opportunities taken or missed, and paths left unexplored. We rarely voice these thoughts openly because doing so invites a kind of vulnerability we're not always ready to face. To admit you would do things differently is to acknowledge imperfection, to admit that your current reality is not the perfect outcome of your past decisions. And for many people, that's a frightening thing to say aloud, but when someone's inhibitions are lowered, when alcohol loosens that grip of self-censorship, they may finally say what they've been thinking for years. What makes this question so powerful is that it often reveals someone's unspoken value system. The changes they would make aren't random. They are rooted in what they now believe matters most. A person might say they would have pursued a different career, not because they hate their job, but because they now realize that fulfillment, creativity, or freedom matters more to them than stability. Someone else might say they would have married earlier or later, or not at all, revealing how deeply their understanding of love and commitment has evolved. In these moments, they're telling you not just about a different life they could have had, but about the ideals they now see as essential for happiness. There's also an element of implicit confession in this question. The changes people describe often hint at regrets they don't talk about openly. They might tell you they would have been braver or more disciplined or less trusting, and behind each of those phrases is a story, perhaps of a moment when fear held them back, when laziness cost them something important, or when misplaced trust led to betrayal. They may not elaborate in detail, but even a short answer can carry the weight of an entire untold history, and the fact that they're willing to voice it to you, even in a slightly slurred, unguarded state, means they're letting you glimpse the fault lines in their life's foundation. From a psychological standpoint, this question taps into counterfactual thinking, the mental process of imagining alternate versions of the past. Counterfactuals can be dangerous if they become obsessive, leading to constant comparison and dissatisfaction, but they can also be enlightening because they reveal the choices that truly mattered. When someone shares what they would change, they're identifying the moments in life that were pivotal enough to alter everything that came after. It's like tracing the river of their life back to the forks where different streams could have flowed. Yet this isn't just about learning their history. It's about understanding their present trajectory. People often attempt to correct past mistakes in their current lives, sometimes without realizing it. If someone tells you they wish they had been more adventurous in their youth, you might notice they now take spontaneous trips or make bolder decisions. If they say they wish they had spoken their mind more, you might see them becoming outspoken in conversations where others remain silent. The answer to this question doesn't just describe a lost possibility, it reveals the changes they are still trying to make now. And that's the profound truth here. When someone tells you how they would start over, they're not just describing an alternate life that never happened. They're giving you a map to the life they still want, the values they're trying to honor, and the person they're striving to become. If you listen carefully, you're not just hearing a hypothetical, you're hearing their unfinished business with themselves. Asking someone, what's the one thing you're afraid to tell anyone, is like sliding a key into the most private lock of their mind. It is not a casual question. It is an invitation to expose the part of themselves they guard most fiercely. The truth that, if spoken aloud, could change how others see them or even how they see themselves. Most people live with at least one such truth. It could be a desire they think is unacceptable, a failure they've never admitted, a resentment they've carried for years, or even a hope so fragile they fear speaking it will destroy it. We hide these things not only to protect our social standing, but also to protect our sense of self. To voice them is to make them real, and once real, they can no longer be hidden behind the comforting shield of silence. When a person is sober, the psychological barriers guarding this truth are formidable. Shame, fear of judgment, and the instinct for self-preservation keep those words from ever being spoken. But when alcohol lowers those defenses, the cost-benefit calculation changes. The fear doesn't entirely vanish, but the part of the brain that manages risk becomes less dominant, and the desire for connection, or simply the relief of unburdening oneself, can take over. In this altered state, people may speak truths they've carried for years in complete isolation, sometimes without even realizing the weight they've been holding until it slips out. From a psychological perspective, this is one of the most revealing questions you can ask, because the thing a person is afraid to tell anyone is usually the point where their identity feels most vulnerable. It's the crack in the armor, the place where their values, fears, and self-image collide. If someone admits they're afraid they'll never be loved, or that they're living a life they don't actually want, or that they've done something they can't forgive themselves for, you're witnessing a moment of profound exposure. It's a level of truth most people never share, even with those closest to them. But there's also an immense responsibility in hearing that truth. Once it's spoken, you can't unhear it, and they can't unshare it. You are now a witness to something they've kept hidden from the world, and that knowledge places you in a position of moral weight. The way you respond will determine whether they feel liberated by sharing it or regret that they ever trusted you. If you respond with mockery, dismissal, or exploitation, you will reinforce every reason they had to keep it hidden in the first place. But if you meet it with empathy, curiosity, and respect, you can transform that moment into something healing, a small but significant act of acceptance in a world that often rewards concealment over honesty. This kind of disclosure can also reshape how you see the person. It strips away the curated image they present and reveals the complexity beneath. You may realize they are more conflicted, more fragile or more courageous than you imagined. And that's part of why this question carries such power. It's not just about the words they speak, but about the deeper recognition that we are all walking around with things we're afraid to say, and that those unspoken truths shape us as much as, if not more than, the things we share freely. In the end, when someone reveals the one thing they're afraid to tell anyone, you are witnessing them stand in the most unguarded version of themselves. That's a moment that demands humility from you, because in hearing it, you are no longer just part of their present. You are now a custodian of their deepest truth. And in that instant, the question stops being about curiosity and becomes a test of your character.